What's up? This is Trey T, and in this video, I will be talking about the 1998 NFL season and what could have been. For those who don't remember the 1998 season, it was special because 3 teams won 14 or more games that year. One of them went 15-1, the other 2 went 14-2. But it was the matchups that could have been that makes the 1998 season so special to me. The Super Bowl ended up being the 14-2 versus 14-2, but the 15-1, that 15-1 team, if they could have made it to the Super Bowl, it just would have been amazing to see. But I'm going to go over the 4 teams involved: the Denver Broncos, San Francisco 49ers, Atlanta Falcons, and Minnesota Vikings. Before I get into their schedules, I'm going to talk about their personnel, who were the main people, and the reason why I even made this video. So starting off with the San Francisco 49ers, the 49ers had Steve Young as their quarterback, Garrison Hearst as their running back. You had Jerry Rice, a young Terrell Owens, and J.J. Stokes as the receivers. The 98 49ers, they ended up 12-4 that year. They were number 3 in offense and number 13 in defense. Next, we have the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons, their quarterback was... So, I'm going to just be honest. Out of all 4 of these teams, if you had to rank them personnel-wise, I feel like most people would have Atlanta at the bottom, at number 4. Anyway, so their quarterback was Chris Chandler. Their running back was Jamal Anderson. Their receivers were Terrence Mathis, Tony Martin, and their tight end was O.J. Santiago. The Falcons finished 14-2. They were number 4 in both offense and defense that year. If you remember the Falcons, that's when Jamal Anderson was doing the Dirty Bird. Every time he scored a touchdown, he started doing the Dirty Bird. He even had his coach, Dan Reeves, doing it. He had the whole team doing the Dirty Bird, even the coach, Dan Reeves. So that's the 1998 Atlanta Falcons. Next team on deck, we're going to get the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, their quarterback was Hall of Famer John Elway. This is actually John Elway's last season. He was like 36 or something like that. The running back Terrell Davis, who had won Super Bowl MVP the year before. Wide receivers were Rod Smith and Ed McCaffrey. For the younger people who don't know, Ed McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey's dad, the one that the 49ers running back now. The tight end, I'm pretty sure most people know who Shannon Sharpe is. Shannon Sharpe was the starting tight end. And the Denver Broncos finished 14-2 that season. The Broncos were number 2 in the league in offense and number 8 in defense. And they were the defending champs. They had just came off winning the Super Bowl in 1997 versus Brett Favre and the Green Bay Packers, who had won in 1996 versus Drew Bledsoe and the New England Patriots. Last team, the team that went 15-1 was the Minnesota Vikings. The quarterback for the Vikings was veteran quarterback Randall Cunningham. The 2 running backs that they would switch in and out, Robert Smith was the starter and Leroy Hoard would come in sometime for him. But the wide receivers, that's the main reason why I made this video. You had a veteran Chris Carter and you had a young Randy Moss. And then the slot receiver, Jake Reed. The Vikings went 15-1. They were the number 1 offense and the number 6 defense. So they were the 15-1 team that everybody was looking for to make it to the Super Bowl. But unfortunately, Minnesota did not make it to the Super Bowl that year. So let's dive into each one of these 4 teams' schedule. In 1998, the 49ers, they finished 12-4. The 4 losses that they had in the regular season, they lost to Buffalo, they lost to Green Bay, they lost to New England, and they lost to Atlanta. So if you remember back then, the NFL divisions were changed because they had only 30 teams back then. Now they have 32 teams. So the divisions are equal now. But back then, that's when you had like Seattle was in the AFC West. So San Francisco actually played Atlanta 3 times that year. They split in the regular season with Atlanta. But then they lost to Atlanta in the divisional game. If you were a football fan watching that 1998 playoff, you remember in that wild card game versus Green Bay, Terrell Owens was just dropping everything that game. He was dropping so many passes. I think he dropped like 4 or 5 passes. And Jerry Rice had a horrible game. Jerry Rice only caught 1 pass for like 6 yards. Terrell Owens finished for like, I think it was like 70-some, 80-some yards. But he was dropping so many passes. And I still remember it was like the clock was running out. It was like 19 seconds left for Steve Young to snap the ball. He snapped it. Terrell Owens ran in the middle of the field at like the 3-yard line. He caught it and he went in the end zone. Boom. He got hit by like 2 people, but he held on to the ball. And no, I think it was like 7 seconds left on the clock when that, because I think that was the end of the game. And he held on to the ball after he got hit, after dropping all those passes that game. And the San Francisco ended up winning, and T.O. was just in the end zone. He started crying, holding the ball. But San Francisco did get away with one because Jerry Rice had fumbled the ball, and the referees called it an incomplete pass when it was really a fumble, which would have gave Green Bay the ball, and Green Bay could have like ran the timeout and stuff. So then after they beat Green Bay, they went to Atlanta and they lost. They lost to Atlanta in the playoffs. So we don't get. So now that San Francisco is out, you're not gonna be able to see. It's no way you would be able to see Minnesota and because I feel like that's what most people wanted to see: Minnesota versus San Francisco. You got the 2 quarterbacks. You got Randall Cunningham and Steve Young. You got the running backs with Garrison Hurst and Robert Smith. But then you got the receivers. You got the veteran receivers in Jerry Rice and Chris Carter. And then you got the young receivers in Terrell Owens and Randy Moss. And we never got to see that because San Francisco lost to Atlanta. So speaking of Atlanta, here's Atlanta's 1998 season. Atlanta was one of the teams that went 14-2. They had 2 losses in the regular season. They lost to San Francisco, and they lost to the Jets. And the reason why they lost to the Jets because I think Chris Chandler didn't start. Their starting quarterback didn't play that game. I still don't know how they lost 28-3 though. But so they lost to San Francisco, lost to the Jets, they end up 14-2, make it to the playoffs. They win in the divisional round versus San Francisco. Minnesota's kicker, I think it was Morton Anderson or Gary. I think it was Gary Anderson because Atlanta had Morton Anderson. Gary Anderson missed the field goal in the NFC Championship game, which would have sent it to overtime, I think, and Atlanta ended up winning 30-27, only go to the Super Bowl and get beat by the Denver Broncos. John Elway won MVP in that, but I'll get to that when I get to the Broncos. But yeah, so Atlanta had a great season. They beat San Francisco and they beat Minnesota to make it to the Super Bowl, only to get blew out by 15 points to the Broncos. But Atlanta had a hell of a season. Now to the team that Atlanta lost to in the Super Bowl, the Denver Broncos. And like if anybody who knows me, you've seen these videos, you'll already know that I'm a Bronco fan. So of course I was happy. Like I was so happy that year when the Broncos beat the Falcons in the Super Bowl. But anyway, so the Broncos that year finished 14-2. How they lost back-to-back games against the Giants and Miami that year, I do not know. But in the playoffs, in the divisional, so they lost to Miami week 16, but then they murdered Miami in the division around 38-3. That was Dan Marino's last game, I think. And then in the AFC Championship game, they played the Jets. I think that was Vinny Testaverde, Curtis Martin, Keyshawn Johnson, Wayne Corbett, I think. They beat the Jets 23-10. And then they went to the Super Bowl against Atlanta. Remember, they had just beat Green Bay in the Super Bowl the year before. 27-24, I think. 31-24. And then they beat Atlanta in the Super Bowl 34-19. Rod Smith had like an 80-yard touchdown. I think John Elway had over 300 yards passing in that Super Bowl. Terrell Davis was the reason they won the Super Bowl the year before against Green Bay. He had like 3 touchdowns and like 157 yards or something like that, I think. But John Elway won the Super Bowl, won Super Bowl MVP. The Broncos finished that season, 16-2? 17-2? But yeah, so the Broncos ended up winning championship. So the Broncos didn't get to see Minnesota, who finished 15-1. That would have been a great matchup, the Broncos against the Vikings. So now let's get on to the Vikings. So the Vikings 1998 season, they finished 15-1. There are only like a handful of teams that have only lost one game in a regular season. The Vikings finished 15-1. Their only loss came against Tampa Bay 27-24. And then they lost to Atlanta in the NFC Championship game 27-20. So we didn't get to see Minnesota versus San Francisco. We didn't get to see Minnesota versus Denver. The fact that Atlanta was the one that took out both San Francisco, and again, I'm not trying to like diss Atlanta or anything, but on paper, that's why you should never go by paper. On paper, you see San Francisco players, you see Minnesota players, and you see Atlanta players. You would automatically think, hey, Atlanta is not going to beat San Francisco or Minnesota, but they beat them both. And they beat San Francisco twice that year. So that 1998 season was crazy, man. I wish we could have got those matchups with T.O. and Randy Moss and Chris Carter and Jerry Rice and Randall Cunningham and Steve Young. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. But hey, at least the Broncos ended up Super Bowl champions. That was number 2 for John Elway and Terrell Davis and Shannon Sharpe. Shannon Sharpe went on to win another one 2 years later in Baltimore. But hey, it is what it is. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like and comment. More videos coming soon. Trey T out. Peace.